Everyone wanted to know when they would finally get married. For 43 years, that was the question. Reporters asked it on red carpets. Talk show hosts dangled it with a knowing smile. Fans debated it in comment sections. The tabloids ran the same headline in cycles, year after year. As reliably as the seasons, will they or won't they? As if the absence of a ring were a problem waiting to be solved. As if what Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell had built together were somehow incomplete. Nobody stopped to ask the more uncomfortable question. What if they already knew something the rest of us didn't? Because here is what the cameras never fully captured, and what 43 years of evidence makes impossible to ignore. These two people watched marriage dismantle nearly everything they had once loved. They watched it slowly, then suddenly, the way damage tends to work. They carried the weight of those endings, the lawyers, the silences, the children caught in the middle. And they made a decision that Hollywood, of all places, was never quite prepared to respect. They decided not to repeat the experiment. They built something else instead. Not a compromise, not a lesser version of commitment. Something quieter, and by every measure that actually matters, something stronger. Something that has outlasted the marriages of nearly every couple who once pitied them for not having one. Goldie Hawn has said it plainly, with the kind of clarity that only comes from having lived through the alternative. A lasting relationship isn't about marriage. It's about compatibility and communication. Kurt Russell has said it with the dry economy of a man who means exactly what he says and nothing more. We hit it off and agreed. Let's have fun until we don't. It's been 43 years. 43 years. No contract. No ceremony. No official vow exchanged before witnesses. And yet, a family of 4 children raised under one roof. Decades of private loyalty in one of the most publicly corrosive environments on Earth, and a love that their own daughter Kate Hudson describes not in abstract terms, but in the specific, unguarded way people describe things they have actually witnessed. Kurt just adores my mom. I see him. He just loves her so much. So before this story goes any further, ask yourself the real question. What exactly is the secret here? And who decided it was awful? To understand why Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell chose the path they did, you have to go back before they chose it together. You have to go back to the wreckage each of them carried into that 1983 film set, separately, quietly, and with the particular exhaustion of people who have already learned what it costs to get something this important wrong. Goldie Hawn arrived at the set of Swing Shift as one of the most recognizable women in the world, an Academy Award, a string of films that had made her the kind of star studios built their release calendars around, a laugh that had become somehow a cultural institution. From the outside, the picture looked luminous. From the inside, it had been anything but. Her first marriage, to dancer and director Gus Triconis in 1969, dissolved 7 years later. The details remained largely private, as she preferred to keep them, but the outcome was the same as it always is. A life divided, a name changed back. The slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding a self that a marriage had partially dismantled. She was 31 years old and starting over. Then came Bill Hudson, the musician, the relationship that produced 2 children, Oliver and Kate. And that ended in 1982 with the kind of rupture that does not stay contained to the 2 people at its center. Children absorb the aftershocks of their parents' failures in ways that take years to fully surface. Goldie knew this. She had watched it happen in real time, in her own home, in the faces of the people she loved most. By the time she walked onto the set of Swing Shift, She had been through 2 marriages, 2 divorces, and the particular clarity that tends to follow sustained, intimate disappointment. She was not bitter. That was never her nature. But she was honest with herself in a way that fame rarely permits and experience always demands. She would later put it in the form of a question. Several questions, actually, delivered not as rhetoric, but as the conclusions of someone who had done the arithmetic and found the numbers did not add up. How many divorces are fun? How many divorces actually don't cost money? How many divorces make you hate the person more than you did before? How many divorces have hurt children? Every question already had an answer. She already knew it. Kurt Russell arrived at the same set, carrying his own answer. His path into acting had begun earlier than most. He had been a child on Disney sets before he was old enough to fully understand what a career was. The son of actor Bing Russell, raised inside the industry the way other children are raised inside family businesses, absorbing its rhythms and its costs before he had the language to name either. By his 20s, he was no longer a child actor navigating adolescence on screen. He was a leading man, building something serious, and aware that the life he had chosen made ordinary continuity genuinely difficult. His marriage to actress Susan Hubley lasted from 1979 to 1983. 4 years. 1 son, Boston Russell, and then the same familiar ending. The papers filed. The household divided. The child left to move between 2 versions of a life that had once been one. He arrived at swing shift, then as a man who had also done the arithmetic, who had also reached the point where experience had replaced theory, who understood, from the inside, what marriage could cost, not in the abstract, but in the specific and irreversible currency of family. What neither of them had calculated was what would happen when they were in the same room. Their first meeting had actually occurred much earlier, in 1966, on the set of the one and only genuine original family band. Goldie was 21, Kurt was 16. The gap in years was wide enough that the encounter registered as nothing more than a passing introduction. 2 people at entirely different moments of their lives, briefly occupying the same set before moving in opposite directions. There was no story there. Not yet. 17 years passed. And then swing shift, and something neither of them had been looking for, which is always the condition under which the most durable things tend to begin. Not a search, not a plan, just 2 people in the same room who had both already learned the hard way what they did not want, and who recognized, without ceremony, something in each other that felt entirely different from everything that had come before. Kurt would describe it later with characteristic simplicity. By then, both of us had been through divorces. We hit it off and agreed. Let's have fun until we don't. That was the agreement. Modest in its language. Radical in its implication. No performance of permanence. No contract signed in advance of the evidence. Just honesty. The kind that requires 2 people to have been hurt enough to stop pretending, and brave enough to begin anyway. What they could not have known in 1983 was how long the fun would last. They could not have known that until we don't would never arrive. They could not have known that the agreement made without a ring, without a ceremony, without a single official witness, would outlast nearly every marriage in their industry, and quietly become one of the most enduring love stories Hollywood had ever produced, hiding in plain sight, beneath a question nobody was asking correctly. But before the endurance came, the construction. And before the construction came, the question that any 2 people in their position would have had to answer honestly, in private, away from the cameras and the headlines and the very reasonable expectations of a world that had decided it already knew how this kind of story was supposed to end. The question was not, will they get married? The question was, what are they actually building? There is a moment in the construction of any long life together when the architecture becomes visible. Not the public version, the red carpets, the coordinated appearances, the photographs that magazines caption with words like "still going strong," but the actual structure underneath. The decisions made quietly, repeatedly, without audience. The way two people negotiate the daily weight of shared existence when the novelty has long since passed, and what remains is simply the truth of who they are to each other. For Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, that architecture took a specific and deliberate shape. They maintained separate spaces within their shared life, a choice that confused outsiders and sustained them completely. Not separate homes born of distance or coldness, but separate rooms within the same house. Separate closets, separate retreats. The kind of physical autonomy that allows two people to remain individuals inside a partnership, rather than slowly dissolving into a single identity that eventually belongs to neither of them. Goldie described it with characteristic directness. "I don't feel penned in." 3 words, an entire philosophy of love compressed into a breath. What she was describing was not detachment. It was the opposite. A structure designed specifically to protect the attachment. Because she had lived inside the alternative. She had experienced the particular suffocation that arrives when a relationship stops being a choice and becomes an obligation. When presence is assumed rather than offered. When two people stop seeing each other clearly because proximity has replaced attention. She had watched that dynamic corrode the things she valued most, and she had decided, with the full authority of experience, never to replicate it. Kurt understood this in the same register. Not theoretically. Not as a concept borrowed from self-help or therapy. As a man who had stood inside a marriage that ended, and who had arrived at his own conclusions about what sustains people and what slowly diminishes them. The freedom they gave each other was not a symptom of indifference. It was the foundation of everything. They built a family inside that foundation. By 1986, 3 years into a relationship that had begun without any formal declaration of permanence, Goldie gave birth to their son, Wyatt Russell. A child conceived not inside the structure of a marriage, but inside something they had apparently decided was more reliable than a marriage. A commitment made of daily choice rather than legal obligation. A presence that had to be earned continuously because nothing contractual enforced it. Around Wyatt grew a family that defied the clean categories that divorce culture tends to produce. Oliver Hudson, Kate Hudson, Boston Russell. 4 children from 3 previous relationships, assembled under one roof, raised together with the kind of intentionality that blended families require when they are working, and that disintegrates when they are not. By every account, by the testimony of the children themselves, now adults with children of their own, it worked. Kate Hudson, who has spoken about her family with a candor that reflects growing up inside a household where honesty was modeled rather than performed, has offered the clearest window into what that life actually looked like from the inside, not the version assembled for profiles or award show interviews. The version visible only to someone who grew up watching it in real time, across decades, in ordinary moments that no camera captured. "Kurt just adores my mom," she has said. "And I see him. He just loves her so much." That testimony, offered not with the breathless quality of celebrity endorsement, but with the quiet certainty of a daughter describing something she has simply witnessed repeatedly for her entire life, carries more weight than any formal declaration either of them could have made. It is the evidence. It is the record. And yet the house that held all of this, literally, the physical house, would eventually become the site of the story's darkest chapter. In 2020, while the world was suspended inside a pandemic that had already made ordinary life feel unstable and strange, the home in Pacific Palisades that Goldie and Kurt shared was broken into. The timing was precise in the way that planned violations tend to be. 2 hours and 20 minutes. That was the window of the couple's absence, long enough to be deliberate, short enough to suggest surveillance. Someone who had been watching, who knew the rhythms of the household, who waited for exactly the right gap. The intruders entered through the bedroom balcony. They moved through the space that Goldie and Kurt had built over decades, past the private accumulation of a shared life, past the photographs and the objects and the ordinary geography of a home, and then they breached the reinforced door of her closet. A door that had been secured specifically to protect what was inside. It did not hold. When Goldie returned and walked upstairs and into the space that had been violated, something broke in her that was not easily named. Not simply the loss of objects, however valuable. Something more fundamental. The sense of safety that a home is supposed to represent. The private architecture of a life. The place where two people lay down the performance and simply exist. Had been entered without permission. Had been taken from. She described it with the honesty of someone still inside the shock of it. I went up to the stairs and I walked into my closet, and I just lost it. But that was not the end of it. 4 months later, Goldie was alone in the house when she heard a loud noise from the floor above her. She did not know, in that moment, what the sound was. She would not discover until the following day that someone had attempted to enter her bedroom while she was inside the house. While she was there. While she was present and vulnerable and separated from Kurt by nothing more than the ordinary circumstance of an evening at home. "I couldn't believe it," she said afterward. "What is happening here?" The question was not rhetorical. It was the sound of a person trying to locate herself inside an experience that had no comfortable explanation, because the violation was not only physical, it was temporal. It reached backward, retroactively, into every evening she had spent alone in that house, and recolored them with a fear that had not been there before. She stopped being alone without protection. "I'm never without a guard," she said. And about the city that had been her home for decades, the city that had made her, that she had helped define, she arrived at a conclusion that spoke to something larger than a single incident. LA is terrible. The couple began to consider leaving. Palm Desert, farther from the density of Los Angeles, offered something that Pacific Palisades could no longer guarantee. Quiet, distance, the possibility of safety. And here is where the story turns, in a direction that no tabloid ever quite knew how to cover. Because what the break-in revealed, beneath the headlines about stolen jewelry and police reports and celebrity home security, was something about the relationship itself. Something that 43 years of public curiosity had never managed to locate by asking about the absence of a wedding ring. When the structure of safety was removed, what remained was not two individuals managing a crisis in parallel. It was two people whose lives had become genuinely, practically, irreversibly interwoven, not by legal architecture, but by the actual accumulated weight of 4 decades of shared existence. The fear that Goldie carried was not hers alone. The decision about where to live, how to be protected, what the future needed to look like, these were not individual calculations. They were the calculations of a family, of a partnership so thoroughly constructed over so many years that dismantling it, even conceptually, was no longer a coherent possibility. No marriage certificate had built that. No ceremony had produced it. No contract had enforced it. They had built it themselves quietly, in the daily and unremarkable practice of choosing each other. Not because they had to, but because after 43 years, the choice had become indistinguishable from the life itself. The house could be broken into. What they had built inside it could not. There is a particular kind of visibility that arrives only in the later chapters of a life. Not the visibility of fame that had belonged to both of them for decades. The recognizable face in the crowd, the name above the title, the particular quality of attention that celebrity generates and that never quite feels like being truly seen. Something different. The visibility of having survived long enough that the shape of a life becomes legible, not just to the people watching from outside, but to the person living it from within. By their 70s, Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell had reached that threshold, and what became visible to anyone willing to look without the distorting lens of the question they had been asking for 40 years was not a love story that had refused to commit. It was a love story that had committed to something more demanding than a ceremony. The daily, unspectacular, deeply unglamorous work of remaining present to another person across the full arc of everything that time delivers. The illnesses, the losses, the physical diminishments that no amount of fame or fortune can negotiate away. The ordinary Tuesday evenings that constitute the majority of any life, and that no camera ever captures, and that are, in the end, where love either holds or quietly dissolves. It held. Kurt Russell, at 75, is still working with the focused intentionality of a man who has never confused activity with restlessness. His appearance in Taylor Sheridan's series, The Madison, marked not a career in decline reaching for relevance, but a craftsman choosing his projects with the selectivity that only genuine security permits. He has nothing left to prove. He works because the work itself still means something to him. That distinction between performing ambition and inhabiting purpose is visible in every frame. Goldie Hawn, at 79, has continued to move between the public and the private with a fluency that most people never develop. The foundation she created in 2003, Mind Up, built in response to her alarm at rising rates of anxiety and depression in children, has become one of the most substantive and enduring contributions of her public life. Not a celebrity vanity project, a structured, evidence-based program that has reached millions of children in schools across multiple countries, teaching them the tools of emotional regulation and mental resilience that she herself had learned to value over the course of a life that had not been without its own weight. She built it because she saw something that frightened her and decided that seeing was not enough. That is a specific kind of character. It does not photograph particularly well, and it generates considerably less coverage than a red carpet appearance. But it is the kind of character that tends to define what a life actually meant when the full accounting is eventually made. And then came the Oscars of 2025. The moment was not planned as a revelation. She walked onto that stage as a presenter, elegant, composed, carrying the particular authority of a woman who has been in rooms like that one for more than 5 decades and has long since stopped being intimidated by the scale of them. And then, mid-presentation, she said something that landed in the room and then traveled far beyond it. "I'm completely blind. I mean, I am." The audience laughed, because she delivered it with the timing of someone who has always known exactly how to hold a room. But the laughter carried something else inside it. The startled recognition of a truth being offered without cushioning. She had been dealing with cataracts. Her vision, the instrument through which she had read scripts and studied faces and watched her children grow and looked across rooms at the man who had been beside her for 43 years, was compromised. Seriously enough that she said it out loud. in front of the largest television audience of the year, without apparent shame or careful management. That is not a small thing. In an industry built on the performance of effortless perfection, in a culture that treats the physical vulnerabilities of aging women with a particular and merciless scrutiny, to name the thing plainly, I am dealing with this, it is happening, here it is, requires a relationship with honesty that most people spend their entire lives trying to develop and never quite reach. She reached it, and she has been reaching it, quietly, for decades. The physical challenges accumulating in both their lives have not arrived as surprises. They have arrived as the inevitable deliveries of time. The things that come for everyone, famous or otherwise, that no net worth or professional legacy can redirect. Kurt managing the ordinary degradations of a body that has spent 75 years in the world. Goldie navigating vision loss and the particular vulnerability that comes with it. The guards now always present. The city that once felt like home, now feeling like something that requires management. And yet, through all of it, the quality of what Kate Hudson described remains visible and intact. He just loves her so much. Not loved once, or loves her in the way that people say they love things they have simply grown accustomed to. Loves. Present tense. Active. The kind of love that a daughter recognizes not from what is said about it, but from what she has watched, repeatedly, in unguarded moments across the entire span of her own life. That testimony is worth more than any ring. Because a ring is a declaration made once, at the beginning, before the evidence is in. What Kate Hudson described is something assembled over 43 years of evidence, of watching a man look at her mother the way that people look at things they genuinely cannot imagine the world without. That does not happen by accident. It does not happen because a ceremony required it. It happens because two people, who both knew exactly what it looked like when love failed, chose, daily, and then annually, and then across decades, to build something that would not. There is a question, though, that sits underneath all of this, that has always sat underneath it, and that the headlines and the speculation and the well-meaning curiosity of 43 years never quite managed to articulate correctly. It is not the question of why they never married. That question has been answered thoroughly and patiently by both of them in their own words on multiple occasions for decades. The real question is this. In a world that has spent nearly half a century waiting for this relationship to either formalize or fail, what does it mean that it did neither? What does it mean that the thing they built without a blueprint has outlasted nearly every marriage in their industry, raised 4 children into functional adults, survived break-ins and health scares and the grinding ordinary weight of decades, and is still, by the account of the people closest to it, characterized, first and foremost, by love? What does it mean that the awful secret everyone expected to find was never there? And what was actually there instead? 43 years of choosing, every single day, without anyone requiring them to. They never stood before a room full of witnesses and made a vow. And yet here is what 43 years without that ceremony actually produced. 4 children who speak about their family, not with the careful language of people managing a complicated history, but with the uncomplicated warmth of people describing something that simply worked. A partnership that outlasted the marriages of nearly every couple who once regarded its informality as a liability. A private architecture of daily choice, separate spaces, sustained freedom, the deliberate refusal to mistake proximity for possession, that held through break-ins and health scares, and the slow, unglamorous accumulation of everything that time delivers to a life. It held. Not because a contract enforced it, not because leaving would have been complicated, though by now it would be. But because both of them, separately and then together, had learned the most important thing that experience teaches about love: that the version of it worth having is not the version that traps. It is the version that, given every freedom to leave, stays. Goldie Hawn said it herself, plainly, in the way that she has always said the things that matter. A lasting relationship isn't about marriage. It's about compatibility and communication. She was not performing a philosophy. She was reporting a conclusion. The kind that arrives only after you have lived inside the alternative long enough to understand from the inside what actually holds and what only appears to. Kurt Russell said it with the economy of a man who has never needed more words than the situation requires. We hit it off and agreed. Let's have fun until we don't. It's been 43 years. 43 years. Said without triumph, without sentiment, with the quiet, undecorated accuracy of someone describing a fact so large and so ordinary that dressing it up would only diminish it. The awful secret, it turns out, was never awful. It was never even a secret. It was always visible to anyone willing to look at what was actually there, rather than at the absence of the thing they expected to find. A man who adores a woman who does not feel penned in, children who were raised watching love modeled not as obligation, but as daily practice. A life built without a blueprint, in an industry designed to consume exactly this kind of thing, that consumed neither of them. In the end, the question that 43 years of public curiosity never quite managed to answer correctly was not, when will they get married? It was always something quieter and more difficult, something that required setting down the expectation and looking honestly at the evidence. The question was, what does a promise actually look like when no one required you to make it? And the answer, assembled across 4 decades in the ordinary and unfiltered accumulation of a life genuinely shared, has always been right there. It looks exactly like this. Now we want to hear from you. Do you believe a relationship without marriage can be just as lasting, just as real, just as sacred as one with a ring? Leave your answer in the comments, because this conversation is worth having. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe, so you are here when the next chapter arrives. Because the most enduring love stories are rarely the ones that end with a wedding. They are the ones that begin with honesty and never stop.